Hello, everyone. Welcome. Yeah, this is an interesting video because this is not one I've done before, but this is a security-related one. With me today is Calvin, and
Hi.
we're going to talk about the bricks mishap. Can you call it a mishap? What is the technical term that happened? This is February 13th. You published an article which was saying what?
Yeah, we found a pretty significant vulnerability in the bricks theme on February 10th, and then disclosed that with the bricks team in coordination with PatchSec, and it was then publicly disclosed and fixed on the 14th.
Yep,
I'm sorry, 13th. Yeah,
13th. Yeah.
Bricks released it on the fix on the 13th, and then we disclose it on the 14th, and then the technical details around a week later. And yeah, this vulnerability was pretty much as severe as it gets, and it was, from judging by the data from PatchSec, exploited within 5 hours, I think. I'm not
That's
sure, but I think 5 hours, definitely less than a day. Um, and yeah, it wreaked havoc, unfortunately. It is to say that before we start, I guess the bricks team did everything in that they could. They pretty much handled this disclosure and the fix perfectly. They fixed everything um, according to our recommendations, and they did it extremely fast. And they also did not in any way try to hide or downplay the vulnerability. So they did pretty much everything they could, and then of course people didn't update in time, and that's where it got bad a bit. Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about what the vulnerability actually is, because it's officially called an unauthenticated remote code execution. Um,
Correct.
let us help it break it down. What part is the unauthenticated? What does remote code execution mean? What does the combination mean? Because most people understand like, oh crap, my site is hacked, but don't really get what it means, how it is possible, and we'll get into that later. But how can we prevent these types of things? So let's start with
So
explaining what.
yeah, I guess we'd have to say like a site can get hacked in many different ways, and likewise a site can then the hack can be exploited in many different ways as well, depending on what actually the motive is of the attacker. I mean, they could turn your site into like a site in their botnet that they use to attack other sites. They could just
Yep.
deface the site, insert backlinks. So it really depends on like you could get exploited in different ways via the same hack. Just depends on who is exploiting it.
Yeah.
And the unauthenticated part means that, well, basically anybody can do this. You need no prior
Neighbor.
authentication. You don't need at least a subscriber account, or you don't
Exactly.
need to be a WooCommerce customer. It literally means I only need to know your URL, and then that's pretty much it. I don't even need to know your URL. We can get into that later, because a lot of people got confused and by why did I get hacked? Like, how did the hackers know that I'm using bricks, or
Yep.
I have my site hidden in search engines or whatever? We can get into that later. But unauthenticate just means that, well, basically anybody can do this. You don't even need a precondition of a compromised low privilege account like subscriber or
So the
author.
severity is in that particular part, the unauthenticated part.
That makes the exploit highly likely to be mass exploited, because you don't need any. It makes it easy to exploit.
Yeah.
And remote code execution is the type of vulnerability which basically allows an attacker to run any command on your server that the user of your WordPress site can actually execute. So to simplify that, imagine like a remote WP CLI. So you can run any commands on the server, and because you can do pretty much anything, you can delete the entire database, you can encrypt the entire server if your user has the permission. You obviously can't encrypt your root files unless your site is running as root, which is probably unlikely, but you could encrypt the entire database. You can encrypt the disk and then
Those
try
of
to
us
get
who have,
ransom. Is it pretty much as bad as it gets?
yeah,
There are unlimited possibilities.
yeah. So for those of us who are have ever experimented with WP-CLI, that's essentially saying you have unlimited and especially easy access to everything inside your WordPress installation. So if that's the analogy that this particular vulnerability is allowing you to do, that is indeed extremely severe. So
And the worst part of that is you don't even need to upload a file anymore. So often there are another type of vulnerability that is related is unauthenticated file uploads, which is pretty common. So they upload a PHP file into your WP uploads directory, and then that way they can
yep,
also get remote code execution, but that can somewhat effectively be blocked. And a lot of people, for example, disallow PHP execution within WP content directories or whatever.
yep,
Many hosts have like configuration toggles for that. But in this case, you don't even need to upload a file anymore. So there's no requirement to upload a file.
you can literally do it
It
from,
just runs it. You can run the commands from within the PHP process, basically.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so that I think that that certainly clarifies the severity of the exploit. So you are a you know this is what you do, right? You research security related whatever, because it's quite diverse in what you do. Um, Walk us through how you get to um, finding such an issue. Like, how does that process work? Because um, when code is being created, bugs are inherent. Security flaws are quite common, but the severity obviously differs a lot. But how does it work from you starting from scratch? Like, okay, you have bricks on your radar. What happens next?
Actually, what we do, like I'm not a full-time security researcher or bug hunter or whatever. It is usually by accident or by coincidence that I find these things, and then
Okay.
I report them. So I don't report everything that I find. I have no time for everything else. But in this case, I was researching like which page builders in WordPress allow users to basically create this code snippet functionality. So there are code snippet plugins
Yep.
where it's pretty widespread, where you enter your PHP snippets and whatever. And I don't recommend using them for the same reasons, because it's like running PHP code from the database can lead to issues if it's not done securely.
And it's not.
And yeah, I don't recommend using them. So I was researching page builders that have similar functionality. Some page builders have these code blocks where you can then
Yep.
inside the editor. Some only allow JavaScript, but some allow PHP as well. So I was researching which page builder has this functionality. For the reasons are not that important right now, but I was researching that not with the intention to find vulnerabilities. It was just product research, let's call it that way. And the way that is usually done is in PHP, there's a functionality, and in other languages as well, it's called Eval.
Yep.
That's the function. And it probably should, in my opinion, if you type that into your editor, you should really think hard if there's not a different way to solve that, because it just takes a random input and then treats it as if that were PHP and runs it as PHP, even though there's no file basically involved.
Ah, yeah,
So
yeah.
there's no PHP file. You just give it any input and it tries to evaluate it as PHP or run it as PHP. And that's how all the code snippet plugins and all these page builder blocks work. You go into your editor, for example, and you type in, let's take advanced custom fields as an example. You want to output an ACF field inside your editor. And
Yep.
then you type echo get field whatever ID, yeah, and the page builder stores that in the database. It's just a text or string in the database. So in the front end, or when that is evaluated, well, how do you basically turn that string or text into running PHP, because you don't want to output the literal representation. You don't want to output as text echo get field. You want the value of what that would be in PHP, right?
Yeah.
But since
Yeah.
it's all dynamic, there's no file or whatever. The only way to pretty much do that, or the way all of the snippets and page builder do this, is with eval. And obviously, this is extremely dangerous. And then I checked that and I looked at how the different page builders do that. And well, then it's like okay, so I can't really walk through what was going in my mind, but it's then pretty obvious to me that, okay, so where does this actually come from? So how do you ensure that, well, so only authorized users can eval
Yeah.
stuff, right? How is it ensured that you just can't feed it malicious input? And you go through the chains and the call stack and how the plugin works. And then at some point, well, you see that, okay, so there's this API endpoint, and ultimately ends up in eval, and that's how you get the remote code execution.
Mhm.
But it's by accident. I don't go around looking for vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And in
Okay.
this case, I reported it because it was it doesn't get any more severe. And
Yeah,
yeah,
because the,
the,
the
the,
the implications are huge, right? This you've explained already, but it essentially means anybody figuring out where a brick site is can do whatever they want with that site. You alluded to even if your site is private and nobody search engine discouraged for index and everything, you can still find those sites. So how does that work?
so that is a pretty common confusion, is that a lot of people in the bricks Facebook group and whatever ask questions like, but how did the hackers know about my specific site?
Exactly.
And they think that they, for example, and they made suggestions like, so the bricks team should now really ensure that the HTML source doesn't contain the whatever bricks identifier in the
Yeah.
CSS classes or whatever, so that nobody knows that this is a brick site. And the fact is that it doesn't work that way. Attackers just hammer IPs, basically the public IP range.
Yeah.
And then if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, they don't even care if it's WordPress. They don't even care if it's PHP. So they would hit a whatever website running Java or .NET, and well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Yeah, they just it's brute force pretty much.
Yeah.
And there are tools that hackers use that can basically scan the entire public IP4 range in hours on a good machine. So they just go directly hammer the IPs, and if it works, it works. And if it worked, obviously the indicator of that is pretty clear. And if it doesn't work well, then they just go on to the next one.
Can you
They
say that
don't
one more
look
time?
specifically for brick sites.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get it. But what you just said, I think bears repeating. When a hacker decides, okay, this is something I want to see if I can exploit, they have a, probably more than one, but they have a tool available to them that
Yeah, they
scans
just plugged it in there. Yeah, then we
pretty much
exploit.
the entire internet in a matter of hours.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
so I think that's a very interesting because I didn't know that either. I knew there were bots and crawlers and things of that they use, but that is a very specific and very efficient way to find whatever you want to find.
Yep.
Okay, so that explains a lot of the people in the deed in the Bricks Facebook community were asking questions like how is it possible I am found? So any type of obfuscation really doesn't help anything here.
I know, and then there are these plugins that I hate them. These plugins that like these hide WordPress and whatever. Like
Yeah.
and when they rewrite the URLs from WP content to assets or whatever, and then they think that, well, it doesn't look like WordPress, so nobody can find out and nobody can hack it. It doesn't quite work that way.
No, no, no. That's that. I think you made that very, very clear. So if we can protect our sites from being discovered, if we have to wait for when a vulnerability is found to be fixed and then to update, because you said you did a research, particularly just looking at page builders in general. You also found a similar issue in Quickly.
Yep. And
Uh,
the common theme between all of them were that all page builders basically want to, and usually when I find a vulnerability, like I think the Bricks one was the first one I found, it's kind of indicative that there's a pattern there. It goes way back to when we did all this 2FA research in 2022, I think. I see something and then it's probably pretty probable that there's a pattern that's repeated. And in the page builder ones, it was always this. So when you go into the page builder, and they always have this live, they want to give you live feedback, right? So if you type in the editor, echo get fields, whatever, and that's a good thing, of course, good user experience. They want to make sure that you can see that reflected immediately in the editor instead of saving, going to the front end and seeing if it worked.
Yeah.
But the editor is running in your browser, right? It's running in JavaScript. They can't run PHP. So the only way for the editor to do that is basically send whatever you just typed in to some backend endpoint that evals it and gives back the result. That's the only way that can work, basically. And this mechanism was not properly secured in all of these cases, or it probably, like, they never thought about that somebody would try to basically hijack this. They all secured when you try to save a post, or, well, you try to save it, then they check the capabilities and they strip PHP code blocks if you didn't have the capabilities, but they never had this kind of vector in mind.
No. No, so that leads into my next question. So if I am using Bricks or Quickly or really any solution that has this type of vulnerability, what is it that I can do to prevent this from happening if it is not solved in the code itself or an update for that code?
So that depends. Are we talking about that being a 0-day? Because like the Bricks one wasn't a 0-day, it was disclosed and then reported, so it was like a 1-day vulnerability. Or are we trying to define what you can do to protect against it?
Yes, the latter.
In case it's not known already.
Correct. So does a security does a WordPress security plugin, does it solve this?
No, there was not a single firewall, or not Cloudflare, not any other server firewall or any plugin firewall would have stopped this unless they had prior knowledge of it.
Yeah.
It would not have even mattered if you're, for example, some enterprise hosts deploy immutable file systems where you can't even change the files in production. Not even that would have protected in this instance, because, well, there are no file creations. It runs entirely in memory, basically. This one really showed why you need proper disaster recovery strategies, which is a part of security, why you need good backups, and why you need to have a proper disaster recovery. You can never protect against anything, and it doesn't really make sense to try to define how you could have protected against this specific exploit, because maybe there's another one that is slightly different and the vector is a little bit different.
I'm asking because people have these questions, right? So if I install a vulnerability checker, does that solve my problem? No, it doesn't, because that plugin is only feeding you, hey, this plugin has a security vulnerability, you need to update it. There's people thinking, if I install any type of WordPress security plugin, does that solve my problem? No, it doesn't, because you just made it clear that there's no way they can actually protect this. Does my firewall, whether that's a Cloudflare firewall or something else that you have in place, does that stop the attacker? No, it doesn't. So it would have stopped it if you know the IP address it would come from. But, hackers don't use one IP address. So if one doesn't work, they'll switch over to the next.
So, for example, in this case, what would have stopped it is if you had uh, if you turn off the WordPress REST API. But that is like not like a solution to that
No,
problem. So I don't recommend turning anybody like the REST API off.
no.
It's,
Let's not encourage people to do that. But I'm just trying to make sure that people understand that there are certain security vulnerabilities that are just not solvable other than fixing the code. So firewall doesn't work. I'm guessing. No, I'm pretty sure. So if you turn this into like if you have a WordPress site and then you use something like in any tool that converts it to a static version, that would have been
yeah, that would have worked. That is pretty much essentially the same thing as having the REST API turned off. If the endpoint doesn't even exist, then it won't work. Yeah.
yeah. So
Static website would have worked if the backend is turned off or behind an IP restriction. Then yeah, it would have worked.
yeah, no, but it's very important to realize that there is nothing you can do other than fix code. So from an end user standpoint, you just have to be extremely be aware of that. You always need to be up to date. That's one. And the second is you always need to be having a disaster recovery protocol in place, meaning you have regular backups of both your file system and your database, and you also test those
Oh yeah, of course.
backups regularly. You wouldn't be the first person that at the moment that you needed that backup discovered that you couldn't restore that backup. So those are things that you need to have in place. Other than that, the end user doesn't have a lot of options here.
In this
So,
case, yeah. So a lot of people get protected or didn't get hacked because they were using PatchTech, and because we reported this vulnerability also to PatchTech.
yep,
They had it in the database first, and then they deployed like a rule or whatever.
right. But that's
And
that's
and that
already a version of code fixing, right? That's not something that is
yes,
blanket.
that is assuming that well, there's no guarantee that the next zero day like that will be found like a researcher, right? And in that case, no like virtual patching tool would have protected against that. But yeah, I mean, I recommend anybody to use that. And in this case, like the exploit window was like a couple hours. So even if you update everything immediately when you are aware of it, like what if you had been sleeping at that time, for example, in
Yeah,
your time
yeah.
zone, and then yeah. So I recommend people use that. And PatchTech, they have this auto update vulnerable plugin functionality, which is pretty good. So as soon as there's a known vulnerability, they just auto update only the vulnerable plugin and not everything in case it breaks your site.
Yeah.
But yeah, as we said, that only protects against known vulnerabilities, and there's really no guarantee that every one of these will be discovered by a security researcher first, right? It could have
Exactly.
been exactly the case that
Just like
instead
security
of me,
researchers are looking for ways in, so are hackers.
correct.
Yeah.
And yeah, in this case, it just showed how important proper backup and disaster recovery is. And it was pretty obvious that in the wider WordPress community, that is non-existent pretty much. So a lot of people, like, let's start from the basics. Like a lot of people had one brick site and then had their entire server hacked because they put 50 sites in one cPanel,
Yeah.
right? Like the basics, and then it just escalated that way. Even though you never had bricks on that site, you got hacked because another site got hacked on your server.
Yeah.
So like, these are the basics. Like one site should have one system user in the operating system, and there should be complete isolation between them.
That is the ideal scenario, but this is the how your server design is done, how that's configured is First of all, not always super clear. Second of all, it's not always easy to change because in general, if you have what you just recommended, then we're usually looking at more expensive solutions as well, and that's not for everybody.
I guess no. I think also like many shared hosting companies, it would be pretty like surprising to me if they don't properly isolate the websites from each other, because they know that if this happens, their entire server gets hacked. They
Yeah.
know that it's a risk to them, and they do that. In this case, but there are still people that rent some VPS and then put cPanel on there, and then they put 100 sites into one cPanel
Yeah, sure. And
instead of using shared hosting or managed hosting, whatever.
those are
That's
way
also a
more
case.
at risk than
But
that.
that's just disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much covering everything on the end user side of things. One other thing, one probably last thing that I'd like to quickly touch is if you're a developer, if you're working in the WordPress space and developer, I think the general rule is don't use Eval because it's evil or
Yeah.
potentially evil. Um, but if you find yourself in a position where you have to use it,
Mhm.
um, do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, of course, and that is the advice that we gave to both Quickly and Bricks, and they implemented these things. So the goal here is twofold. You want to ensure that first of all, nobody can create code blocks if they don't have the right privileges, obviously.
Yeah.
And then you also, the second goal is you also want to make sure that the plugin never, under any circumstance, evals a code block or a code string basically that is not known to have been created by a privileged user previously.
Yeah.
So you need to ensure that you only eval what you know has been created like a week ago by an administrator. And the way you do that is well, I guess I can't explain it not technically, but you said we are addressing plugin developers here. So you use digital signatures. So
Yeah.
when you save the editor, you save the post, you check, okay, this user, let's say, is an administrator. Instead of only storing the code block, the ACF get ID, you store it and you also store a signature of that exact code. It's the
Exactly.
only way to, so it's impossible to brute force the signature.
So sort of hashes.
So yeah, sort of hashes it, yeah. But it's impossible to brute force this because the hash key is stored in the WP config unless that is compromised, but let's not consider it here. You store a hash using the WordPress holds, and then you basically do the reverse in the front end when you want to render that block. So you check, okay, I have this code, I have this signature, does this match? So if I run the same algorithm over the code again, does that match what I have stored in my database?
Yeah.
And if not, I know that it has been tampered with. And you have to make sure that you use this mechanism every single time you use eval. So the simplest way is just create like a simple wrapper around eval, create your function my plugin secure eval, and then you do this check right before you eval it. And that is pretty much what they did in both of these cases.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good tip because I understand that most people they don't really get excited hearing you explain that there's nothing they could have done to prevent it. Um, Implementations had to be in place to have this not be an issue. So then they need to rely on developers to fix it in the proper way. If you can avoid eval, of course. If that's not an option and you need to still use it, then what you just described as hashing the function itself.
And we also have this. It's easier to understand if you just look at the 10 lines of code that it actually is, and we have that on the disclosure page. So if you're a developer Then you can look at the page of the disclosures on our site, and then we have the proposed patch there with some demo code. It's actually not that complicated.
Yeah, which is in the article that you published, right? Yeah.
Correct. In both of the articles, there is always a section. So anytime we disclose a vulnerability, before we send it to the vendor, we write some proposed patch. So like, this is how we would fix it. Then we send it to the vendor, and then we also publish that.
Okay. Then from my standpoint, I think we answered all the questions we had listed. Yeah, sorry. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that
We could talk a little bit about the backups part, because that is also where I saw a lot of people get screwed. Is
disaster recovery part? Yeah.
yes, and specifically the backups and backup plugins, because too many people rely on backup plugins. And that is not a good idea for the same reason that you don't rely on plugins for malware scanning, because if your site is already compromised, how can you ensure that you can safely back up your site? Sorry, how can you ensure that you A, safely back up the site, and B, how can you even restore it? So the malware could have just basically rendered your site unusable, except the part that is the actual malware, and then you can't even back up anymore. So what if the malware just deletes your backup plugin? How do you restore that?
Or in some cases, if the malware not only stops the backup plugin from working, but actually uses the backup plugin and deletes all the.
Oh yeah, that's also like that's also a possibility. I don't think they, to be honest, I don't know why the attackers don't do that more, but
I've
yeah,
seen it.
if
I've seen it happen. I've seen it
it's
happen.
pretty, yeah, that's pretty bad. So they could either delete your backups, or they could prevent you from restoring your backups, and that is actually what happened in some cases. So what do you do then? Well, this is, and it's not a good place to be thinking about these things after the fact. Like
No. So
you
what's the
should have,
best advice you can give?
well, you need server level backups. So the backup and the restore functionality should happen at the server level. Yeah. So outside of PHP, you don't back up the site from within the site. That is like we had like a couple of months ago, we talked about the different security layers.
Yep. In our podcast. Yes.
In your podcast, and this is like a pretty glaring violation of mixing the concerns where they don't belong. So you don't back up your site from within your site. You have like a server level process that just wipes everything there is in that directory, and then just restores everything from a remote source, so that the actually infected site has no way to tamper with that.
So the advice is get in
We need
contact
server
with
level
your
backups.
hosting. Yeah, get in contact with your hosting company. Ask them how they do backups and how the restore process works, so you'll know whatever is in place. Most oftentimes, you don't need to have a backup plugin in place to begin with, because if the server already has it, if your web hosting server already has it, then most likely they have a backup of that backup. So the redundancy is usually in place there. And yeah, it's just a smarter way of handling resources and separation of concerns, what you just said.
Yeah, and so make sure also that they have some option to basically plug in your Blackblaze key or AWS key, so that the server actually can back up to your own storage as well.
Yep.
In case, so just to have more, like it's really cheap, and it's like the best insurance you could actually buy for your website for the value that you get. Just make sure that you're not relying only on backups managed by a hosting company. So it's good. It's better than plugin managed backups, but ideally you would have some backups that live directly on your server locally, because
Also much faster.
yeah, these are faster to restore, and these are for these types of scenarios where I don't know, you messed something up, an update broke your site, and then you restore from there. But these are not for disaster recovery, because You don't know if they have been tampered with, if your site got hacked. These are for I messed up, basically.
Yeah.
And you also want to have full backup of the sites remotely in whatever storage provider that you like to use. So ideally your hosting company handles these server level on-site backups for you, and they also give you an option to plug in whatever storage API you want to use, and then also ship these off to the remote API. And these can be used then for disaster recovery, where you know that, okay, this is clean, and then you can, well, start the recovery process from there. But really, you need to think about these things beforehand and not after you got hacked.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I don't know, it doesn't sound nice to say, but I think the barrier to entry might have dropped a little bit too low, in my opinion, to start basically offering hosting or to host client sites. I mean, it's I don't know. Uh, I think these things should be like, you don't have to be an expert at anything, but if you don't have backups and you host sites for your clients and you don't even think about what could happen if your site is hacked and whatever, I mean,
This is a good moment in time to start leveling up your knowledge and your procedures.
correct. I mean, everybody learns at a different pace, but yeah, I don't know, maybe just don't
Force
jump in
yourself to learn.
immediately and host for clients. Maybe learn a bit more, or maybe work in an agency for a year or two, or I don't know, like just like learn the craft a bit.
Yeah.
It's the same way in any other profession.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree. I fully agree. I think that concludes the vulnerability disclosure, how it worked, why it worked, what it allowed us to do, or us, what it allowed the hacker to do, what we can do to prevent it, what we can do to make sure that if we cannot prevent it, how to solve it anyway. So
How
yeah,
to recover from it without being a total disaster. Yeah.
exactly. So I have one last question for you. The time between the vulnerability disclosure, as you published it on your site, and the time that the fix was made available to the end users, is roughly a day. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people have questions like, why did that need to be so short? Why didn't you disclose it on a Monday and give the Bricks folks a week to fix whatever needs to be fixed, deploy the fix for everybody to update, maybe even force update it where possible, and then wait till the next Monday? So give them 7 days to make sure that everybody's updated.
That is like a very good question, and a lot of people got confused about that, and a lot of people got angry about that. Like, why do the security
Yeah,
researchers
yeah.
even disclose stuff, and why do they even look for stuff? First
Well,
of all,
please keep looking.
so let me check my timeline here. So we contacted Bricks on the 10th of February.
Yeah.
And they responded to us at the 10th, and they had it fully patched at the 13th.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Then they released the update in their system. I don't know what they use. I think they use EDD or whatever. So a new update was available, and they emailed all of their customers, and they put a post on socials and in their community forum, like, hey guys, important update, like security, you need to update right now. This is serious and whatever. And they did a great job at that. They did not try to downplay that. And so many vendors in WordPress, when they fix the security issues, they put something in the changelog, if at all, fix security improvements or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I've seen them. Right.
Bricks did that very, very good. So first, Bricks disclosed this first. We didn't disclose it first. PageTech didn't disclose it first. Bricks published it to their own users publicly. So at
Okay.
that point, it was already public knowledge,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we on our page published it like a couple hours later, but there were no details. There were just like the same information that Bricks had.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just said remote code execution and whatever. The thing is, attackers don't rely on technical write-up. So a lot of people were very angry. Initially, we had something on the page, the full details will be disclosed in, I don't know what it was, like 48 hours or whatever.
Mhm.
And they said, why only 48 hours and why not more? And you're only helping attackers. The thing is, the people that are willing to exploit this, they don't need our help to figure out how the vulnerability works. They just, and there's an excellent video that was sent to me from another white hat hacker who basically didn't know about this vulnerability. And then he just read the BRICS announcement and then he recorded him live, reverse engineering how to create the exploit script. And it took about 2 hours. And this is a known fact, and PageCheck also has the data on that hackers actively monitor the WordPress SVN repository, they monitor plugins for any changes, and that's all automatic. They monitor plugins for any change that indicates a security compromise.
Yeah.
Sorry, a security fix
Mhm.
automatically. So if you don't disclose it, like you don't want to be that, you don't want it to be a slow bleeding, right? You want it to be like a beheading, as they say.
Yeah.
Not a slow death. If you don't alert your users as strongly and as loudly as you can, you're only giving further attackers to the hackers because they already know about this vulnerability and they don't need our technical write-up to figure out how it works. They just take it, put it into a version control system, see the difference. They see, okay, this endpoint had authorization added and the Eval functionality had some guardrail around it. Okay, I know how. Now I just need to figure out what URL to type and well, we can link to a video, and it takes like 2 hours, right? And it kind of matches up with the 5 hours that PageTech saw when it started to get exploited. So if you just intentionally hide the severity of the vulnerability or just say, look guys, there's an update, and then a week later you say it was a security update, you're only putting your users at a disadvantage because then they won't update, right? They see it, I can wait a week, or I'll do it like
Next day might
tomorrow after
Tuesday be
dinner, right? Or after the
scheduled.
meeting
Yeah.
or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
no, that's a good point. That's a good point.
yeah, so you need that to be as, and that's also why like we have a good network. Like we reach out to a lot of people, like, hey, please share this and like spread that message. It's important, and like can I amplify that post. So like that most people update in time. Yes, there's always a certain amount of people that won't update in time, but if you don't do that, well, the percentage of sites that get hacked is even bigger because
I can
people
understand.
just didn't know, just didn't take it seriously, but the attackers will, and the attackers don't need you to tell them that this is serious. They can just figure it out themselves. If they look at the diff, like a diff is like a, when you put both versions into a system, then you see exactly what line changed, like what code was added, and if the method name is, I don't know, check permissions, and then you see like a change there, then you immediately know, okay, so this is related to no permissions were checked. So this is the entry point. And then you see, okay, so how was it exploited? Okay, it ends up in an eval call. Then you immediately know what's on if you see the code. And like if you do this as a professional hacker, then you don't need
9 of these 10 steps are already automated, so
it's you don't need the vendor to tell you, hey, this is serious. You just see that by looking at the code. Yeah, but like many people didn't see it that way. They, I don't know, I guess they looked for a way to redirect their anger or whatever. I don't know.
and of course, when your site is hacked, it is quite normal to feel agitated, angry, sad, all of these things. That's normal.
It's easier to say that this was the fault of the disclosure or the researchers or the fault of BRICS than to say, yeah, my process wasn't really where it should have been, right?
All right. Thank you for clarifying then. Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked, because I didn't want to put you in the defending.
No,
So yeah, thank you so much for coming on and explaining the details, the ins and outs. Much
sure.
appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and do let us know when you find something again.
We will do.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.